All
Just
right,
getting on
Joe.
my go.
Joe, thanks for agreeing to meet up and talk about the plans I have for my make for this first make cycle. Let me give you a quick overview. I am springboarding off of a comment that Christopher made in the introductory hangout for this week's make cycle, where he said toward the end of the hangout, he said he was really interested to know um, to see reverse how-tos, like where people don't know how to do something and they're posting those. And so got me thinking about a project that I have in the works, which is something I'm planning for my class next year. And let me just share my screen, or are you yeah, I guess you're looking. Are you sharing your screen right now? I think.
Yes, I am. Does that help you?
Okay. Not really, because I want it to show. Let me see. I'm gonna get
Share your
over
screen. I'll
to.
stop sharing mine.
All right. So do you see? Okay. Yeah, you see this. These slides I've got here, where I'm basically now thinking about. Um, okay, I don't know how to host a massive open online conference with my students, but we're going to do it anyway. And this is really something that brought me to the CL MOOC in the first place, because I wanted to start thinking through um, how I can start to leverage some different collaborative tools, online collaborative tools that are available to me. Um, and so I should probably clarify that I have two things going on in my school next year. In addition to teaching, I'm working as a technology integration coach, and one project that I'm involved in is I'm supporting a project-based learning pilot with 4 classes of ninth graders, and the collaborating teachers are working with a theme overarching the whole year called Sustainable China. And then I'm also teaching an advanced placement seminar to 2 classes of 10th and 11th graders. And AP Seminar is a new course in the school this year, and it really, here's a little, I don't know if this is, yeah, here's a little, you can, I've got in this slide for people a little scroll through of some information about the AP Capstone, where AP is starting to offer a diploma program and some of the collaborating schools. And I'm not seeing this as like a limit, like that I only want to collaborate with AP Capstone or AP teachers, but that it's an opportunity because the program is kind of new, and we have a lot of teachers who are just getting started with it, and I think they might want to be sharing their student products. And so some of the guiding criteria for me as I think through my goals for a connected conference is that I want my students to have an authentic audience for their research and their group presentations related to some research they do for the seminar course. I want them to be able to access outside expertise. I really like this idea that comes from the expeditionary learning schools, which is that students are producing work that meets professional standards. And for the teachers that I'm working with, if I can get some collaborating teachers, I want there to be a nice online community of practice as we prepare for this and talk about how we're supporting our students and getting ready for it. Big question I have in my mind has to do with what does that audience look like for my students online? And I'm thinking I want to have a face-to-face, so it'll be a blended conference that will invite some schools from Shanghai, where the city where I'm working right now. I should probably be able to get a couple other schools or groups of students to come and participate face-to-face, but then also I want to have an online presence for other schools around the world to participate. And I'm kind of inspired by this work of the Global Issues Network and the GIN conferences, where some of them have a little bit of a virtual streaming aspect going on. Or there's this site, Taking It Global, where students share out about their community activism projects and things like that. But I really would prefer to have my students working with open, free tools rather than these things that sort of limit their audience just to school groups. I'd like the conference to be really open to anybody, people who haven't necessarily tapped into the Taking It Global or the Global Issues Network community. And so I'm liking what's happening with the CL MOOC, and I think that I can probably have some balance between a static website that's advertising and getting information out there, and then some sort of like dynamic collaborative space. Google Plus seems to be a really good option, but a big question I have in my mind or reason I hesitate to commit to Google Communities and Google Plus is that I work in China, and those things are fairly unreliable if you're operating in China without a VPN. Now, my students would have access to it during the school day, but outside of school hours, there may be some of my students that would have a hard time using Google tools. And then the same goes for Facebook. So I'm really, in presenting this, I don't know how to make to the CL MOOC community. I've got this draft slogan for my conference, which is "Calling all minds, this is not a drill," and that kind of goes back to my history with like MUN conferences, and feeling like I feel like students get really engaged, but that learning that they do at Model United Nations conferences doesn't really carry over because they're always in this mode that it's a simulation. And one of the things that both the GIN network and the Taking It Global do is they're asking students to talk about actions they're taking in their lives right now, and trying to connect their learning to things that they can do right now. We're not about preparing students for life 10 years after they graduate from high school, when they finish college and they're out starting their careers. They can start doing things right now. And so I want to be connecting with community action groups, service clubs in my school, other teachers, students. We've probably got some programmers in the school, a programming club who might be able to help with some of the technical heavy lifting, and that's really what I'm after. So what are the big ideas coming through for you, and what clarifying questions might you have? Did I lose you? I think you're muted, Joe. I'm not hearing any of your clarifying questions. So do you want to try?
Yeah, sorry, I'm muted because I was typing. And so what I'm going to do is, I haven't asked a clarifying question yet. What I want to do is just share like my bulleted notes so you see that. Here it is. So here's what I came up with. I think, you have this, you have a clear purpose, and your audience is not limited to, but ought to include interested AP seminar teachers and schools interested in that concept. And then you have those local schools in Shanghai that you can invite. And so you can do some of the legwork to get, massive open online conference. I think it's, the comment I would have there, and it's a little bit in jest, is the idea of massive. Massive may have to mean cool in this case because you're not quite sure about your audience. So in terms of, but open online is what's central to you. You're probably less concerned with like attracting thousands or gathering big data, and what you really want is invitational, and you don't want to limit the audience necessarily because your purpose is about students being agents of change, of community action. And so there are other networks that would be interested in that, and so I appreciate that sense of openness, the idea that you don't sound like you're trying to create an online community of practice for AP seminar teachers, obviously, nor just a community of practice for those students, but you're trying to make the conversation more broad and more invitational. So I think that's interesting, and it's a take on open, right? And then the next thing was, open free tools, and you and I have talked about the Chinese censorship. A question that comes up for me there is, yeah, there are limitations to using Google. I know you've talked to me about some of the ways schools work around the Chinese filters to allow Google to happen on their networks. And so I wonder, if it had to happen during the day at school, if you got buy-in from several schools, then you can give everybody sort of one way around the Chinese filter that is kind of, or the Chinese censorship that is pretty standard across those schools. And then you can harness those tools. you can also always, look for other tools. And I think that, that may or may not be a challenge. But that was the first thing I thought is, what if you host it during the school day? And what if it's, the kind of thing where, or you're convening on a Saturday, so you're operating inside those I think you guys are using VPNs to get around the censorship at school. And then I think the important distinction for me is, and how you can broaden even the conversation and start pushing towards more involvement and more interested networks, is that key paradigm shift that when you come together, when you bring students together, they're not role playing. I mean, there's value to Model UN. At the same time, this idea that they are agents now and they're not pretending that they're adults with a job. They are in fact agents of change in their community, and the work they do in the classroom might promote change that they desire because of their community-based interests, is something that would it would interest a massive audience. I don't know that it would necessarily attract a massive audience at first, at your first invitation. Those are the key things I'm hearing. What do you think about that?
Okay, I'm going to do similar to what you just did. I'm going to share my notes with you to, let me get that.
Oh, and also as a disclaimer, I don't know if us sharing the notes will show. Actually, I think us sharing the notes will show up on the Hangout, but there is a chance it won't.
Okay.
In which case, we just want to attach these docs.
So, what you see, so yeah, the thing that got me thinking initially about it being open, invitational, was that I've had some contact with even elementary teachers in my school who are doing like a community garden on the school grounds, and this could be, they talk about why it is that it's good to grow your own food and things like that, and this is sort of goes back to this idea of that it's a citizenship is at issue here, and that any learning we're doing at school should really be connecting to how we live our lives and the kinds of decisions we want to make about being contributors to a community. And I'm going to jump down to what you were saying about sort of like how massive is the interest, and the last point here being that like a lot of the international schools that I come across have this in their mission, like they're trying to educate global citizens, right? And so they all have this in their mission statements and in a lot of their PR stuff, but people really struggle to articulate what that means, or to say, here's something that we're doing systematically that we think is asking students to develop citizenship skills. And I think that there's a nice overlap with connected learning there. And so did you just see something that said the video ended?
The video ended?
I saw something that flashed up and said the video ended. Maybe it just stopped sharing my screen. I don't know.
It looks like it's still going to me. You froze for a second, and I have muted the live stream, but I'm watching sort of the lag. So I think you're still good. Unless
we're good.
We're good?
It says stop broadcast now, so I think we're still going. So we'll just go. It says live. I got this live light and everything on there too. So one of the things I was saying there before I had a little hiccup was that a lot of schools, and it's definitely in the International Baccalaureate Diploma program, they're really explicit about wanting to create like constructive contributors to a global society. But a lot of times our pedagogy doesn't really match that, or this is littered all over our literature, but it's not really impacting our practices necessarily. So I think that it's something that the school could get behind, and that other schools could potentially get behind, especially when you lay over sort of the trendy nature of MOOCs and stuff. Now, I am going to come into contact with a lot of AP seminar teachers at a training I'm doing later this summer, because it's the third year of any schools in the world offering this course, AP Seminar, and there's like, I don't know how many new this year. And And this is also, I believe it's the first course AP's ever offered where they're requiring all teachers of the course to attend a training workshop. So that's going to be a good networking opportunity. I'm really hopeful that I'll be able to get a few collaborating teachers from some different time zones, because it might be that the conference we can even run it kind of round the clock for 24 hours or a good bulk of that 24-hour time. Now, as you were talking about the Chinese firewall and some of the ways around that, I was remembering that I was having a conversation with somebody in one of the other techie people in my school, and we were talking about whether it might be possible to redirect, like we might be able to sort of like host the Google community, or to have people access the school server, so our students, they can't access Google directly or YouTube directly when they're at home, but they can always access the school. And we might be able to use sort of our learning management system like Moodle or something to redirect. That's what it was. You can embed and you can embed other content in Moodle. So it might actually be like our school servers. So as long as they can get into our school, they can access it as long as our computers at school are working over the VPN and accessing the Google community. Maybe. That's something I might play around with. And certainly if anybody knows anything about that, that would be super helpful. That was just totally speculative conversation I was having with one of my colleagues. But I guess I'd like to get other feedback from you in terms of like, what do you think about what else needs to be put out there for people in the CL MOOC community to understand what I'm trying to do and potentially recognize opportunities to engage and collaborate?
A couple things. I think that the big thing that comes to my mind is, what's the takeaway for students, and what do you hope? Like, if certainly the idea that as we're thinking about the infrastructure, and you've talked about kind of dual platforms, or you're going to have a static site and then you're going to have a social space, or you might have multiple social spaces, but the idea that you're thinking about the arrangement for discourse, etc., for the conference, then kind of the objectives for the conference. I think as you sort of touch up against things that are really important in the connected learning community, how is this going to? What are the takeaways for students, and what would a student get? Because what is it? I mean, it might be powerful learning for the teachers to learn how to collaborate in this way. What are students going to take away? Because a student, is not going to feel, oh, this was so cool, I was part of a massive open online conference. Like, pulling off a MOOC or any form of a MOOC is not a reward for students. It's the connections, and then how do you go beyond something like a conference? If we're talking about takeaways for teachers from conferences, even more important, if when students are going to participate in a conference and be agents of change, how do you, what would you hope to see in terms of networked connections between students, and pushing up against some of the things we see in terms of, social spaces like the Harry Potter Alliance, etc. Like, that's a place where kids have agency and they, work for change in the world, and there's an online connection. So our, sort of affinity grouping, is that an interest? Is a carry-on of this work, or checking in periodically through the year, so you have a feeling that there's sort of a community of practice? I think that's a big question for me. And knowing that there's the barriers to entry for teachers, at the same time always keeping that in the foreground. That just like we don't want, it does no good for a teacher to go to a conference, get really excited, and then not really implement or think about, or not really change practice or improve practice. So even more important for those kids.
Okay, so let me pick up on that a little bit. And okay, so I think at the very least, the takeaway for students is that this authentic audience gets the students to raise their game a little bit in terms of hey, this website is public, this conference is going out to other people, and if I can invite other teachers or possibly professors that I've worked with before, or experts in the fields that they're studying to be audience members or to come in and be part of panel discussions during the conference and stuff, then they're just going to be like, it just takes their sort of typical approach to academic tasks and raises it to a whole nother level. So that's one thing, to experience that and to feel what it's like to have the pressure of an audience, but also the excitement of an audience that's not your teacher. And so when we have, and I should also say that the, so this is like from the course overview, which I'm actually linking to for people. I'm going to share this document out so people can read the whole course overview and see that students are supposed to engage in conversations about complex academic and real-world issues. Like, that's the whole focus of the course. And when I think about, oh, well, they should be engaging in complex academic and real-world conversations with people who are actually studying these issues or working in these areas, and that's where the conference gets to do that. And what also happens then is during the first semester, they would be presenting, my target is to do this at the end of first semester when they're sharing out group presentations, and then they iterate and do a similar type project second semester, but totally individually. So I'm thinking like that's where sort of the networking with other students around the globe comes in, where they might get, they've gone through this process of researching and presenting in the conference as a group, and then they get exposed to lots of other ideas, and they can make a decision about, hey, do I really want to push forward with what I was studying, go deeper on my own on some tangent, or did I find a collaborator potentially that we can be sharing resources as we each pursue individual lines of research, or they just get exposed to a lot of work that other students are doing. And I just think seeing a lot of access to a variety of models is really positive for students, and getting a sense of how they can evaluate the quality of their own work relative to the feedback they're getting from experts and relative to what they're seeing other students do also. Because that's one of the big anxiety-provoking things for students in these externally assessed courses like AP or IB courses is the whole time they don't really know how well they're doing relative to the course demands. Like, I can give them feedback on their projects, but if they see what 100 students are doing from 20 other schools, then they go, oh yeah, my project's really strong, or I'm feeling good about what I'm doing.
Nice. Okay. So feedback on that part, I think, let's see, my thing is, the last piece kind of struck me in terms of external assessments can be challenging, and I just invariably go back to badging, though, where you do start to separate the instruction provider from essentially the, any type of expert assessment, except to say that with badging it's really much more granular. And so are there ways to think through more granular assessments, and how do we share that criteria openly? So again, the anxiety is a key piece. Also, them not seeing the pathway between the start of class and the conference where they're presenting. You'd want them to have some sense of how they're doing, and you'd want them to have a range of ways to do it. And so, just making sure that map isn't just in the teacher's head, and the test isn't the thing bringing the anxiety. And so, how do you think about more granular like assessment ideas, but even less because you're talking more about self-assessment or about meaningful formative assessment that can be shared. So I think that's implications for badging are important. And even if you leave badging out, then how do those, maybe it is about conversations between the students where they're comparing work and comparing portfolios perhaps, then that's another authentic reason for them to get together. Again, it's not about the test being the anxiety piece. It's about this idea that a looming external assessment, can make you feel like you're doing valuable work, but you don't know if it's going to resonate on its measure. Whereas, first, it would be a great thing for a student to be really self-assured because they compared their portfolios with other students, not to compare to see who's doing best, but to be sure that they're engaged in powerful global work that makes a difference. And so when those students start to draw their own conclusions or have enough framework for for being able to determine that they're doing important community work, then test be damned, they have the agency that they are doing good work. And right now, having all those possible points of comparison kind of hidden behind the expert can be tough. So I like that as a thinking through outcomes of the conference.
Right. I'm gonna share another little thing. I added some to my notes from another document that I've been working with here, and these are what I've thought through in terms of major products and performances kind of along the way throughout the semester, and some of this is dictated by the AP guidelines for the course, and some of it is my own thinking. They do have a group and individual component with their first semester product that's part of their AP score, where they each have to do a written individual research report that then links to their group topic, and then they sort of like put together the research of 3 or 4 people and present together. And I thought one of the things that I would be asking them to do along the way is an annotated bibliography shared in Diigo, to where they're finding resources and annotating them and sort of saying what purpose that source is serving in their research. And then these can even be things that might start to seed the pre-conference website, right? So we can even get people who are building up to come to the conference, see if we start this, if I get the collaboration started early enough with different teachers, and then we actually start to collaborate using our digital tools with people, collaborating asynchronously with other students around the globe, then there's not really like a badging program, but here's where you get the granular feedback on your steps along the way, right? So like you sharing out your annotated sources in a Diigo group and seeing what people are commenting on there and seeing how that stands up to, or how that fits in the environment of things that are being shared, and whether people are reacting to the ideas and what kind of ideas you're getting from other people that are pursuing similar questions. And then I guess the other thing is, like, because there are these component tasks, I guess that's where I would kind of say, okay, you know, we could think about like, okay, here's the badge for your outline of the research product paper that you have to write and submit to AP in connection with your first semester group project, right? So like, you know, I can set up these different stages, and as much as I can give a public audience for each of those stages, that sort of serves the purpose of the badge. It's like, you did this, you got to share it out to some other people and get feedback on your work to this point. And I've done some good things with having students do screencasts of their draft written work and talking people through that, and do that virtually. And so I could see that being a nice way for students to get feedback on their thinking along the way. And yeah, I guess that's kind of what I think about in terms of badging. But when you think about that, when you mention that, because it hadn't really occurred to me, but I am thinking like, okay, but you do want feedback on the granular things along the way, and I'm trying to build in an audience along the way, and really have another thing that comes out of the Expeditionary Learning Network of schools is this they talk about a culture of collaborative critique. So as much as possible, I can build a culture of collaborative critique with other students around the globe, but then even be bringing in experts on the different topics that the students are talking about and saying, oh, you guys are finding these resources. Have you thought about this? Have you found this? Have you considered this? And so that's where they start to incorporate some language from experts in the field, and also get some, you know, they're really collaborating with people who are doing professional level work. And I think that's something where the wider I can cast the net in terms of teacher collaborators, the more likely we are to get some really highly engaged experts who are interested in talking to our students also.
Yeah, okay. So my final thought there is, you know, because you mentioned two things in terms of you mentioned two things that stick with me about badging. First, like the idea that you might badge the completion of the outline. And so the thing I just like reframe there is, think about the competency or the skill underlying the outline, because the outline itself, you know, the completion of it is not what is going to be the evidence on the back. Like, we want the outline to be evidence of a skill they've demonstrated, and or a competency that they've demonstrated and gained, right? But when you talk about like a culture of collaborative critique, to me, that, like, how do you, like, if we say that to a bunch of AP students, that's probably in your head and really fuzzy in theirs, right? Whereas that, if we could make culture of collaborative critique, if that's what is the underlying piece of a potential badging system, that's important. And how might a skill you've learned in the outlining fit in there? Or when you show up with your annotated bibliography in Diigo and you have like been able to put your audience there and even frame their feedback, or you've brought questions that you want them to respond to, then you're demonstrating those skills and competencies for collaborative critique, right, that are transferable. So thinking about badging that inside, and like, how does the outline play in? How does the preparation of the Diigo? How does the first 3 minutes of your presentation of your bibliography inform the badge? That kind of thing, and then thinking about what you can attach as evidence if you want to go down that badging road. But I think that culture of collaborative critique also is a takeaway from the MOOC, is that we're not pulling off a MOOC to do a MOOC. We're doing it to make these connections and establish a culture of collaborative critique. So that's, and it's something that the teachers will be learning right alongside the students, likely. If you're hosting the conference, then how are you also inviting collaborative critique from the participants?
Right, and I even think that's something that I want to be, as much as possible with collaborating teachers. I kind of want to be previewing or going through this process as much as possible with collaborating teachers as we get our students ready. So we're kind of, it's one of the things that you see happening with the CL MOOC, right, is we're participating as learners, and then we're also making connections to how we might learn some things from the experience so we can structure experiences for our students later on that draw on some of the same principles. And so as much as possible, I want to be engaging the teachers in that, some of the similar processes that we want our students to go through with each other. And if we can have a culture of collaboration amongst teachers, which I think is really rare and valuable for teachers to find that, then one, they're going to stay engaged and they're going to want to be there and contribute their best work, but also that we're modeling the type of learning experience that we want them to recreate for students in their local or in their immediate local surroundings. But then we have the scaffolding of the network, right? The network of teachers and collaborating schools to we have a range of models and a range of people who can help us give feedback, and that's something that I think that teachers struggle with a lot, is giving feedback that causes learning, not just that evaluates achievement. And I think as much as we can step aside and put the students in touch with another audience, it really allows us to help be a coach or a facilitator rather than the arbiter of their learning.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I think that's powerful, and I think that we're kind of getting to a place where you still won't know how to host a massive open online conference until you do, right? And so at the same time, I think we are talking about sort of purpose and takeaways at the varying levels, and then also interested audiences. So we push it massive. So I think, and I even think that what you and I are doing is to some degree a little bit of collaborative critique, of the rough plan and thinking through it. And so just remembering that we're all everything's a potential model, and that this is something that might end up, two students might end up sharing this type of connection, and then they might produce a 40-minute video like we are, and then you might ask them to go back and find the 7 minutes where you really feel like there was evidence of strong collaborative critique, and right. Then they might drop it into Mozilla Popcorn Maker and just shrink down to the 7 minutes and annotate why and what, and they submit for your review, and then you could review and remix and put feedback in. And so then they're leveraging those digital tools, but it's not about the digital tools. It's about show me evidence of collaborative critique.
Yeah. All right, so let's. I'm going to stop the broadcast there unless there's any final word you want to throw in, but I think that's a nice stopping point.
Yeah, me too.
Okay.
Right on.